Here's the rewritten text. You're safer now. The risk of someone yanking off your nerve gear is super low. The 2-hour window to get offline should be enough time for help to arrive and take you to a safe place like a hospital, where you'll be protected. So don't worry about your body. Just focus on beating the game. I was shocked. What do you mean beat the game? I screamed. We can't even log out. How are we supposed to just play along and have fun when our lives are stuck in this virtual world? I glared up at the creepy headless red robe that seemed to stretch up to the ceiling. This isn't a game anymore. But the voice kept talking, like it was responding to my freak out. Be careful though. Get ready for a reality check. Sword Art Online just stopped being a game. It's now a whole different world. Here's the deal, if your health runs out, you're not coming back. When your character dies, it's gone for good. And that's not even the worst part. I knew what was coming next, but it still made my stomach twist into knots, and it will fry your brain. He said, his words dripping with seriousness. I had to bite back a crazy laugh that was bubbling up inside me. It sounded insane, but I knew it was real. My eyes drifted to the top left corner of my screen, where a thin blue bar glowed softly. When I focused on it, some numbers popped up. 3042. Those were my hit points, my lifeblood in this virtual world. My life on the line. Imagine playing a game where your real life is at stake. That's what I was dealing with. If my health points dropped to 0, it was game over for real. The creator of the game, Kadokawa, warned us that the console could use microwaves to hurt our brains and even kill us. This wasn't just any game though. It was a game where you could actually die. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. During the 2-month test period, I died more than 100 times. But here's the thing, when you died you didn't really stay dead. You would come back to life in a place called Black Iron Palace, which was located north of the town square. It might sound weird, but this is how role-playing games RPGs usually work. You die, learn from your mistakes and try again. Each time you get a little better and stronger. But in this game it wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about living or dying. Here's the rewritten text. But wait. What? If we died in the game, that was it. We were gone for good. We couldn't even quit playing. I thought this was crazy. This is ridiculous, I said to myself. Who would be brave enough to explore the wilderness when they could die forever? Most players would probably just stay safe in town. But then Kadokawa spoke up, like he knew we were all thinking the same thing. There's one way to escape this game, he said. All you have to do is make it to the 100th floor of Aincrad, and beat the final boss. If you can do that, you'll be able to log out safely. The room was silent for a moment. Then it hit me, I finally understood what Kadokawa meant when he said conquer the summit of this castle. He wasn't talking about just any castle, but Aincrad itself. This huge floating fortress had 99 floors above us, and we were standing on the very bottom. Suddenly Klein shouted out, "Clear the 100th floor." It was a pretty crazy idea. He jumped up and shook his fist, his voice shaking with excitement. We can't do it. I heard the beta testers had a tough time just getting started. He was right, only 1,000 players tested the game, and after 2 months they only made it to the 6th floor. Now there were almost 10 times as many players, but how long would it take to reach the top all 100 floors? I could tell everyone around me was thinking the same thing. The quiet worry in the air started to turn into murmurs of concern. People began to whisper to each other, sharing their doubts and fears about what lay ahead. I didn't hear screams or cries for help. Instead, most players were confused. They didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of twisted welcome ceremony, or was it really as bad as it sounded? The creator Kadokawa had just dropped some crazy news that was hard to believe. I looked up at the empty robe hanging in front of me, feeling like my world had been turned upside down. I couldn't wrap my head around this new reality. The worst part, I was stuck. I couldn't log out and get back to my own room, my own life. There was only one way out. Someone had to reach the top of this huge castle and defeat the final boss. It sounded like a crazy quest, but it was my only hope. Here's the rewritten text. If my health points or HP ever dropped to 0, it was game over for real. I mean really gone, as in, I wouldn't exist anymore, but no matter how many times I tried to wrap my head around this crazy idea, I just couldn't accept it. Just a few hours ago, I was eating lunch made by my mom, chatting with my sister, and heading up to my room. Now all of a sudden I was being told I could never go back. It felt like a bad dream. Was this really happening? Just then, the person in the red robe spoke up again, waving their white glove to get everyone's attention. Their voice was super calm and serious. "Now let me show you that this world is your only reality," they said. "I've got a surprise for all of you. Check your item storage to find it." Without even thinking, I swiped down with 2 fingers to open my menu. Everyone around me did the same, and the air was filled with a bunch of cool beeping sounds. When I clicked on the inventory tab, I saw something new at the top of the list. It said hand mirror. I was curious, so I tapped on it and chose the materialize option. Suddenly a tiny mirror appeared with a fancy sparkling sound effect. I picked it up, but nothing weird happened. Yet. I stared into the virtual mirror, and saw my avatar's face staring back at me. I turned to look at Klein, who was checking himself out in his own mirror. He looked like a total boss, dressed as a samurai warrior. Suddenly a super bright light flashed around him, and a few other characters nearby. The next thing I knew, the light had swallowed me up too. Everything went dark for a second. When the light faded away, everything looked normal again. But something was off. Klein looked different. His weird armor and red hair were still the same, but his face had changed in a major way. His eyes used to be slim and cool, but now they were big and round, like they were gonna pop out of his head. Check out Klein's new look. His nose was super skinny, like a bird's beak, and his cheeks and chin were covered in messy, scruffy hair. He didn't look like the cool samurai guy he used to be. Now he looked more like a wandering warrior or even a bad guy. I was so surprised that I blurted out, "Who are you?" Klein just smiled and asked me the same question. Me. "Who are you?" Suddenly it all made sense. I remembered what Kaiba had said about giving us a special gift. I grabbed my mirror again and took a closer look at myself. My black hair was styled in a pretty normal way. My eyes were soft and gentle, hidden behind my long bangs. And my face was still kind of round and babyish, which is why people often mistook me for a girl when they saw me with my sister. I didn't look like the brave hero I used to be either. Something had definitely changed. I stared at my reflection in the mirror and my jaw dropped. The face looking back at me was mine. "Whoa, it's really me," I exclaimed. My friend and I locked eyes again, and we both shouted at the same time. "You're Klein. You're Kurito?" It sounded like our voices were changing, but that wasn't what mattered right now. We both lost our grip on the mirrors, and they crashed to the ground with a faint cracking sound. As we looked around, we saw that everything had changed. The colorful crowd of fantasy characters was gone, replaced by people who looked like they just stepped out of a real-life video game convention. But instead of costumes, they were all wearing swords and armor. It was crazy. The whole scene had transformed into something entirely new and unexpected. Something was really off, and there were way more guys than girls. How did this happen? We had all switched from our cartoon-like characters to our real selves. Our new virtual bodies looked like us but made out of blocks and simple shapes. It was pretty cool but also kind of creepy. I felt like I'd been scanned from head to toe.
"Aha!" I exclaimed, looking up at Klein. "I get it."
The special headset we're wearing has tiny transmitters all over it, even on the part that covers our faces, so it's not just reading our brains, it's also mapping out what we really look like. Klein looked around nervously. "But what about my height and weight?" he whispered. I glanced around too. The other players were still staring at themselves in amazement, but they all seemed a bit shorter than before. Klein and I had set our characters to be the same height as us in real life, so we wouldn't get confused during the game. But now it looked like everyone had shrunk a little. Have you ever noticed how people like to make themselves look better than they really are? It seemed like most of the players in the game had added a few extra inches to their height. At least 6 inches, maybe more. And it wasn't just their height that got a boost. Their bodies looked way bigger too. But here's the thing. The Nerve Gear, which is the device that lets us play the game, can only scan our heads. So, how did it know what our bodies really look like? Luckily Klein had an idea. "Hey, I just got my Nerve Gear yesterday," he said. "Remember when we set it up and it made us do that calibration thing?" Klein was talking about a part of the setup process where the Nerve Gear asked us to touch different parts of our body. It turned out that this was how the system figured out how big or small we really are, by measuring how far we had to move to touch ourselves. It could create a digital version of us that looked just right. Oh yeah, that makes sense. We realized, the calibration process was like a secret measurement tool that helped the game get our bodies just right. Imagine a game where your avatar is a perfect copy of you, same face, same body, same everything. That's exactly what happened in the world of Cell. Every single player was transformed into a virtual version of themselves. It was crazy. It's like real life. I said to myself, the creator Kayaba had made our avatars look just like us on purpose. He wanted us to feel like our online lives were actually our real lives. My health points now felt like my actual heartbeat. Klein looked at me with wide eyes, scratching his head in confusion. Kirito, why would he do something like this? He asked, his voice shaking. I just shook my head. I had no idea why Kayaba would do such a thing. It was a total mystery. I pointed up at the sky. Just wait. He's going to answer that question, I said. And then Kabe's deep voice boomed out again. It echoed through the air, making it seem like he was talking right to us. You're probably all wondering, why is this happening? He asked. Is it some kind of terrorist attack? Is Kabe trying to kidnap us for ransom money? As he kept talking, something weird happened. His voice, which had been super serious and boring, started to sound a little different. It was like I could hear a tiny bit of feeling behind his words. I felt a pang of surprise. Was Kabe a tiny bit of feeling behind his words? Here's the rewritten text. I'm feeling pretty satisfied right now. You see, creating this world was my ultimate dream. I built the Nerve Gear and Sword Art Online, just to make this happen. And now it's finally here. Kayaba paused for a moment before speaking again in his usual flat tone. Well, that's the end of the tutorial phase of Sword Art Online. Good luck, players. His voice faded away quickly. Then, something cool happened. The guy in the crimson robe just disappeared. He sank into the air like he was melting into it. First, the top of his hood vanished, followed by his shoulders, chest, arms and legs. All that was left was a tiny ripple where he used to be. Suddenly the huge wall of messages in the sky vanished into thin air. The wind swept through the square, and the sound of music drifted in from a distance. A band of virtual musicians was playing, and their tunes brought life back to the scene. Everything seemed normal again, but with some big changes. The players were finally waking up to what was happening. The square erupted into chaos, as thousands of voices shouted at once. People were freaking out. This can't be real. Someone yelled. Others screamed. Let me out of here, or I have to meet someone tonight. This is crazy. The air was filled with desperate cries. No, no, no. Let me leave. The noise was deafening. Chaos erupted around me. People were furious, screaming insults and pleading for help. Some were even crying out in rage. It was like we'd lost control. Just minutes before we were all excited players, but now we were trapped and acting like prisoners. As the shouting continued, something weird happened. My mind started to clear up. The truth hit me hard. This was real life now. Akihiko Kayaba, the genius behind this game, had warned us about this. He's a brilliant but unpredictable guy, and that's what makes him so fascinating. The scary part. I knew I wouldn't be going back to my normal life anytime soon. I'm talking months. Maybe even longer. That meant no seeing my mom or sister. No talking to them. It was a tough reality to face. This might be my last chance. If something went wrong, I'd really be gone for good. The Nerve Gear was like a super powerful gaming system that could hurt me in real life. It could even kill me if I wasn't careful. I took a deep breath and spoke up. Klein, come with me. I grabbed his arm and pulled him through the crazy crowd. Even though we were back to our normal bodies, he still looked really tall and strong. Luckily we weren't stuck in the middle of the mob, so it didn't take long to escape. I quickly walked down a street that led away from the crowded square. We ducked behind a parked carriage, and I turned to Klein. He looked spaced out, so I tried to sound as serious as possible. Klein, I said sharply, trying to snap him back to reality. Let's roll. I'm out of here, heading to the next village. You coming with me? I said, keeping my voice down. Klein looked at me from under his weird bandana, but I could tell he was thinking about what I just said. If what we heard is true, we need to level up fast. We have to get stronger if we want to make it in this game. You know how it works, there's only so much treasure, experience points and gold to go around. The more you win, the tougher you become. But here's the thing, everyone else is thinking the same way. That means the areas around the town of beginnings are going to get picked clean in no time. We need to move, if we want to stay ahead of the game. Here's the rewritten text. We're stuck waiting around for a long time, and we need a plan. Let's head to the next town and set up a base. I said, I know the way and I can keep us safe, even if we're only at level 1. I didn't usually talk that much, but Klein listened carefully. After a few seconds he made a face. But remember what I told you earlier. My friends from another game waited with me all night to get this game. They're probably still in the town square, and they're online. I don't want to leave them behind. I stopped breathing and bit my lip, wondering what would happen next. Here's the deal with Klein, it was super obvious what he was thinking. He's a friendly guy who loves his friends, and he didn't want to leave them behind. He wanted us to take them with us on our journey, but I just couldn't say yes to that. I'm pretty sure I can keep Klein safe from the tough monsters we'll meet on the way to the next village, even if it's just the two of us. But if we bring more people it gets too risky. What if someone gets hurt really badly, and, well, you know what Kayaba said could happen. It's a scary thought. If that happened I'd feel like it was all my fault. Because I'm the one who wanted to leave our safe spot in the first place. I don't think I could handle feeling responsible for something that terrible happening to someone. The pressure would be too much for me to deal with. I didn't think it was possible, but Klein seemed to notice my hesitation again. He flashed me a big cheesy grin and his stubbly face crinkled up. Shaking his head, he said, "No way, I've already asked too much of you. I used to be a guild leader in the last game, so I should be able to handle this. You've taught me some cool techniques, and I'll be fine." He tried to sound calm, but I could tell he was worried. Maybe this is all just a bad joke. And we'll be able to log out soon, so go ahead, go on without me. I stood there for a few seconds, not saying anything. I was torn about what to do. Then I said something that would haunt me for the next 2 years. Okay, I nodded and took a step back. Looking back it seems like such a simple word, but it would change everything. I kept talking but my voice was getting all scratchy. Okay, we'll split up here, just message me if anything important comes up. I said, see you around, Klein. I tried to walk away but Klein suddenly shouted out my name, Kurito. I turned back and our eyes met. It looked like he wanted to say something, but his face just scrunched up, and no words came out. I waved goodbye, and started walking northwest, towards the village I was headed to next. But before I got very far I heard Klein's voice again. Hey, Kurito, you know what, you're actually kind of cute. I rolled my eyes and called back over my shoulder, and you're way more handsome now that you're a bandit. I couldn't help but smile a little as I walked away from my first friend in this new world. It was weird to be leaving him behind, but I kept moving forward. I dashed through the city's winding alleys, my heart racing. I glanced over my shoulder but I was alone. A weird feeling stuck in my throat, making it hard to breathe. I took a deep breath, pushed aside my fear, and started to run. My journey took me past the northwest gate of the town of beginnings, through a huge field, and into a dark forest. I kept going, determined to survive. But I wasn't alone in this struggle. Thousands of other players were fighting for their lives too. In just 1 month, 2,000 players had died. It was a scary time. We were completely cut off from the outside world, no messages, no help, no way out. I didn't stick around to see how bad things got, but I heard stories about the panic that set in, when people realized they were truly trapped. It was chaos, pure madness. The crowd went wild with anger and sadness. Some players even threatened to wreck the whole game world. They tried to dig up the stones in the city square, but it was no use. The buildings and streets were a permanent part of the game, and their attempts to tear them down didn't last long. It took a while, several days, actually, for everyone to calm down and accept what was happening. Eventually new ideas started to form. The players began to divide into 4 main groups. The biggest group, made up of almost half of all the players, decided not to believe what Akihiko Kayaba had said about how to escape the game. Instead they just waited for someone to come and rescue them. It's easy to understand why they felt that way. Who wouldn't want to be saved from a tough situation? Imagine your body sitting in a chair or lying on your bed at home, breathing and alive. That's the real you. What's happening here is just temporary, like a detour on a road trip. If things change just a little bit you could go back to your normal life. You might not be able to click a log out button, but there has to be a way out if you can just figure it out. There's another reason to feel hopeful. The people who made this game, Argus, and even the government, are probably working really hard to rescue us. If we just stay calm and patient, we'll eventually wake up in our own beds surrounded by our families who love us. It's like waiting for a problem to be solved. And it will be. Imagine being famous at school or work, even if it's just for a little while. It's easy to get caught up in thinking that something exciting is about to happen. I have to admit, I was hoping for the same thing. But some players decided to play it safe and wait it out. They stayed in the first city, using their money which they called carefully to buy food and find cheap places to stay. They formed small groups and hung out together. Luckily the town of Beginnings was huge. It took up almost a fifth of the whole floor. It was as big as some neighborhoods in Tokyo. This meant that all 5,000 players had plenty of room to settle in without feeling crowded. But as the days went by, nothing happened. No help arrived and we were all still waiting. Imagine waking up every morning to the same boring view, a huge gray ceiling made of rock and metal. It was like living under a giant lid. The people trapped in this virtual world, called SAO, knew they had to do something soon. Their money wouldn't last forever. Some players decided to work together to survive. About 30% of the players, or around 3,000 people, joined forces. They were led by a guy who managed a popular online gaming website in Japan. He was smart and organized, and he helped the players form smaller teams. They shared items, information, and tips on how to navigate the tricky labyrinths that led to the next floor. This group took over a cool castle called Black Iron Palace, which stood tall in the center of the town of Beginnings. From there they sent out instructions to other players and collected supplies. As time passed, this group became known as the Army, and it wasn't just a nickname anymore. They even wore matching uniforms. But not everyone was doing so well. About the 1,000 players were struggling. They had wasted their money, were too scared to face monsters in the wilderness, and were starting to get desperate. And to make things worse, they still had to deal with basic needs like hunger and sleep. Even in a virtual world, it wasn't easy being trapped in SAO. Sleep is essential, even in a virtual world. Your brain needs a break, no matter what's happening around you. In the game, when players get exhausted, they check into inns and crash on comfy beds. If they've got enough cash, they can even buy their own place in their favorite town, but that's a big accomplishment. But here's a weird thing: hunger. You might not want to think about it, but somehow your body is still getting the food it needs, in the real world. Maybe you're being fed through a tube or something. The good news is that eating in the game doesn't actually fill your belly in real life, so you don't have to worry about getting a virtual stomachache. Imagine you're playing a game where your character gets hungry just like you do in real life. Eating virtual food like bread or meat makes the hunger go away, and you feel full again. It's weird how it works. Maybe only a brain expert could explain it. But here's the thing: once your character starts feeling hungry, it won't stop until you feed them. It's like your body is saying, "Hey, I need food now." And it's really hard to ignore that feeling. In this game, players go to virtual restaurants and eat food made of computer code. Luckily, we don't have to think about what happens after they eat. Let's just say it's not pretty. So, what happens when players run out of money and can't afford food? Many of them end up joining the army because they have no other choice. It's like their characters are saying, "I'm starving. I need a steady meal ticket. And fast."